Precisely 5 minutes after the homeowner leaves for work in the morning, a package is gently delivered to their doorstep containing an impulse purchase from the night before. This box is just one of 36 million that will be delivered across America over the next 10 hours, serving a growing appetite for home-delivered consumption. But inside this particular package is a humble paper shredder purchased for $59.99 with free delivery. As far as modern products go, it's actually pretty basic. It only has 40 components in total, and they are each made from common generic materials. But even to assemble this cheap desktop appliance, those simple parts collectively traveled over 500,000 kilometers, went through hundreds of industrial facilities in dozens of countries, employed thousands of workers, and it all started right here. In the Northern Territory of Australia, the Alkangove mine extracts 12.5 million tons of bauxite every year. Australia is the largest producer of this raw material in the world, and this mine is one of its biggest. The operation is simultaneously so remote and massive that it's actually the fourth largest township in a region roughly twice the size of France. This is particularly impressive since the permanent population of the outpost is actually less than a few hundred people. Almost everybody here at a given time flies into work at this mine and then flies out back to civilization once their roster is complete. And if you think that sounds a little bit Avatar-esque, well, the main street is called Pandora, and their wildlife is probably just as deadly. Anyway, the mining process that takes place here is almost astonishingly simple. Most of the material that they're after is literally sitting on the surface, so instead of drilling deep into the earth, they just blow up the dirt and scoop it into giant trucks. This crude technique is highly effective and economical, but it does have one unintended side effect. Since everything happens at the surface, the red dirt of this sprawling extraction site are easily visible from space. Either way, once it's collected, the raw material is moved along an 18-kilometer conveyor belt to a processing and storage yard at the very tip of the peninsula, where the alumina ore is separated from other impurities. It's kept here until a buyer sends a bulk carrier to dock at the mine's dedicated shipping port. And then it's back on another conveyor belt to a ship waiting almost a mile offshore. The vessels moving this material are some of the largest bulk freighters in the world. They're so large that they can't actually get that close to shore without a dedicated deep-water port, and those are expensive. The port only handles two particular products in bulk. Ships take out raw alumina and bring in heavy fuel oil, which is used in a self-contained electrical plant to power both the industrial mine site and the local township. Both raw ore and liquid fuel can be piped or moved on a conveyor, so it's easier to get the cargo out across the ocean to the ship than to bring the ship to the cargo at the shallow shore. Once loaded, this glorified pile of dirt will start a 3-week journey up the Malacca Strait, through the Indian Ocean, the Suez Canal, and the Mediterranean to end up here on almost exactly the opposite side of the planet, in Iceland. This small country is blessed with almost unlimited geothermal power, which makes the energy-intensive process of turning raw alumina into refined aluminium very cost-effective and environmentally friendly compared to alternative plants that power their operations with fossil fuels. Thousands of tons of raw alumina oxide is loaded into massive furnaces and then electrolytically separated into pure aluminium. If you ever did an electrolysis experiment in science class separating out hydrogen and oxygen, the process is almost the same, only it's done with molten metal instead of water, and the energy requirements are an order of magnitude greater. To refine just 1 ton of aluminium takes approximately 15 megawatt hours of electricity. To put that into perspective, that would be enough energy to drive a standard Tesla Model 3 over 60,000 miles, or 100,000 kilometers. This plant, on the other hand, smelts more than 1,000 tons every day. The reason it's worth it to ship this raw material halfway across the world is because the energy savings of refining aluminium in Iceland with its cheap electricity pay for the increased shipping costs more than 10 times over. Once this process is completed, the molten aluminium is poured into ingot molds and then stacked into pallets, which can then be loaded back onto the same kind of bulk carrier that delivered the raw materials in the first place. Normally these ships are loaded with loose dry goods, but they're effectively just big floating boxes. If they can safely store something in their holds, they can ship it. From there, the next destination, back through the Mediterranean and the Suez, is up to the Chinese city of Foshan. This industrial city center across the bay from Hong Kong and Shenzhen has become a trade hub for raw materials like copper, steel, and aluminium. Vendors like Henan Aluminium Industrial Company will buy these ingots directly from smelting plants and then ship them to their warehouses across the river. These businesses then wholesale these raw ingots, but also turn them into alloyed sheets and plates to be sold at a slight markup to industrial customers throughout southern China. A lot of these products are sold through existing contact networks, but if you're inclined to buy industrial quantities of metal, they also post their wares on sites like Alibaba. Although you do need to buy 5 tons at a time, so it should last you a while. The 6061 grade aluminium alloy from Iceland can actually charge a slight premium over regular sheets because certain suppliers prefer the European manufacturer's quality control and green manufacturing process. Of course, most manufacturers simply don't care as long as the material gets the job done, so the marketplace between vendors and buyers is fierce. However, once a deal is made, 30 tons of cylindrical alloy beams are loaded onto a barge and floated another 1,000 kilometers up the Pearl River to a machining plant just on the outskirts of the city of Nanning. It's probably a city you've never heard of, but it's home to nearly 9 million people and is a major producer of the parts that make the products you interact with every day. Once the beams are unloaded into the factory warehouse, they're loaded into grinding machines to etch out a basic spoke pattern, and then they're sliced lengthwise to produce hundreds of basic standardized gears. Mechanical parts made out of aluminium are not nearly as strong as those made out of steel, but the lighter weight and easier machinability of this metal makes it very popular for low-stress applications in basic consumer machines. Once they're machined, the pallets of gears are then shipped back down the river to another buyer who ordered the parts in bulk a month before. At this point, the 1 ton of raw bauxite scraped out of the ground back in Australia has been turned into 5,000 little metal gears. The net material hasn't actually changed that much, apart from a few trace metals thrown in to form an alloy. However, as unrefined ore, it would sell in China for around $75 a ton. These basic gears, on the other hand, are now going to be sold in exactly the same city for $5,000, a markup of 600%, which has so far justified every step in the process, but it's not done yet. These gears are actually being forwarded from Guangzhou to another buyer in Vietnam. They're loaded onto a 20-foot shipping container and then into a small cargo ship, which will make the short 2-day journey from the Ocean Gate shipping terminal, no, not that Ocean Gate, to the port city of Haiphong. Over time, as China has developed, it's actually started outsourcing a lot of its basic manufacturing the same way that the West has outsourced their basic manufacturing to China. Chinese workers and businesses have developed an array of highly technical industrial skills and expertise. Cities like Guangzhou are also not cheap to operate in anymore, and workers in these cities demand wages enough to compensate for this cost of living. What this means is that basic hand assembly is far more economical in Vietnam than it is back in China. Major manufacturers like LG, Samsung, Bridgestone, Yazaki, and Foxconn all have massive manufacturing plants in this city because it's one of the most competitive places in the world to put stuff together. It's still close to China, so technical pieces can be imported and assembled components can be exported with very few barriers, while line workers here simply earn about 1/5 of what similar Chinese workers would make a few thousand miles up north. In this case, the gears end up in a smaller factory that specializes in low-end consumer hardware. Here, the gears are attached by hand to an electrical motor, which is then combined with lower-stress plastic gears, a rubber belt, a stack of steel teeth, all held together by an injection-molded plastic case. None of these components were made in this factory, just being put together here. In fact, each and every one of them have all taken a similar journey from raw material extraction to refineries, machining, component manufacturing, and assembly, in addition to all the warehousing and shipping that comes with it. But the journey is still not over yet. The technical components have all been assembled, but that package back on the doorstep in America didn't contain an EC43515 MCD P4 cross-cut electric shredder subassembly. It contained a user-ready paper shredder. Most manufacturers don't want to deal with the stress and persnickety requests that come from retail clients, So once this housing is assembled, it's shipped back to China to a warehouse that produces white-labeled consumer products for several retailers across the world. These generic internals will eventually be used in several different models of paper shredder, some of which will cost significantly more than others. The way it works is that a retailer from a country like America will design a plastic housing to go around the internal components and then sell their model to end users. In this case, the American retailer will work with the Chinese wholesaler to pick some injection molded shapes and colors which they think will work with their branding to best appeal to their target consumers in their home market. The Chinese factory produces large batches of these models for a fixed price and will also work with other suppliers on packaging. Additionally, a printed cardboard box and foam insulation is provided by a supplier in Thailand, and everything is put together and loaded onto specially compliant pallets, which are then placed into a 40-foot shipping container. From there, the Chinese wholesaler and the American retailer use a third-party customs broker who specializes in booking slots on container ships and making sure everything gets through customs at each end with minimal headaches. Since the boxes containing the paper shredders are not particularly large, heavy, or dangerous, they can be forwarded straight from the port in Los Angeles to the Amazon inbound cross-dock a few miles up the road. Trucks constantly drive this route 24 hours a day, taking containers from the dockside to this distribution warehouse in a process called dryage. From this, the containers are unpacked, and individual products are then organized and sent out across the country to strategically placed fulfillment centers where they'll await a midnight impulse purchase. This whole process was just one single branch of a very small basic product tree. Tracing the origin of every component in this shredder would literally take hours, and that's to say nothing of goods with thousands of far more technical parts. Even this cheap basic appliance, which will statistically only be used about 12 times before being disposed of, traveled many times around the world because that's the cheapest way to do things. Australia has resources, Iceland has practically unlimited energy, China has an unrivaled industrial network, Vietnam has a large cheap workforce, and the USA has insatiable consumers. It's up to you to decide if you think this web of comparative advantage has really made the world a better place. But what it has done is made things cheaper and more convenient. Today, a paper shredder is an impulse purchase, but just 50 years ago, an electronic device like this would have been a family heirloom. If there's one invention above all of that which has made this possible, it's the humble box most of these parts have been ferried around in along the way. So if you liked this video, go and check out the next one on the incredible life of the humble shipping container.